Conference. It is really great to see some familiar and some new faces here today. I think it's safe to say after 2 years of COVID, lockdown, all the difficulties that Lebanon is going through, it's really nice to be assembled in person finally. So this event was actually supposed to take place last December or early January, but we deliberately postponed it to be able to hold it in person, and I'm very glad that we did. So I would first like to thank the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, first, for welcoming me as a resident scholar within their team, and second, for being just as enthusiastic to organize such an event to bring together local and international researchers who are doing really important work in the region. And so the University of Helsinki's Center of Excellence in the Ancient Near Eastern Empires is a co-organizer in today's event, and we are very happy to have members from the center with us today, and I'm sure we're going to have really engaging conversations. And finally, as you all know, we had a change in our venue. So one of our talks today is about archaeology in times of crisis. Well, organizing a conference in times of crisis is just as tricky. So, so I would like to take this opportunity to thank Haigazian University and its president, the Reverend Dr. Paul Haidostyan, for welcoming us and hosting us at such short notice. I think it's really great that we're very happy to be collaborating with Haigazian, and it's great to be at an institution that has and continues to contribute so positively to Lebanese society. So for now, and it also has a very special history, which we will learn about later on today. But for now, I'm gonna please ask you to welcome Dr. Paul Haidostyan, who is with us this morning and is going to say a few words. And then he'll be followed by Dr. Anu Leinonen, who's the acting director of the Finnish Institute, who's also going to say a word, and that will kick off our conference for today. So please, Dr. Paul.
Thank you so much. Well, I welcome you at Haigazian. It's so easy and so difficult to know what to say in a few minutes about an institution. In fact, this month I complete 20 years in this position. So then it becomes even harder to know what to say about it. But I'll give a few examples and hopefully relate it to the type of work that you are interested in and you do. Of course, Haigazian is a Lebanese university like others in the American system, English language mostly, except when you're teaching Armenian or Arabic and so on. It's an English language, liberal arts program, bachelor's, master's program. People from all over Lebanon and many from Syria study here, especially in the past 10 years. School of Business, Economics, Social and Behavioral Sciences, these are the bigger ones, but we also have General Sciences and some Humanities. We have a very active center in Armenian diaspora research and Armenian research. We have probably today the most prominent annual publication on Armenian studies, which is all sorts of studies about the Armenian world. It's an annual 2 volumes per year. Having said that, I should also add in Lebanon that most people think because Haigazian is the only Armenian-owned university outside Armenia, then the students are Armenian. No, 40% usually are Armenians, the rest are from everywhere. The same is with the faculty. Now, to tell you a few interesting points. As Vanna said, you will see a couple of interesting, important monuments for our history. However, the building you saw, you know, with the arches, and by the way, I brought some. This was painted by one of our faculty members. It's a postcard. Later you distribute. Because I'll tell a story about this, and that's my contribution this morning. So keep it as a souvenir. It's called the Mugar building. Mugar is the name of someone, an Armenian, whose actual name in Boston, right, when he moved there 100 years ago, his actual name was Dermagerdician, Stephen Dermagerdician. Now, for Boston, Dermagerdician is a challenge, so he just made Mugar. He chose a few letters, Mugar, M-U-G-A-R. This is the Mugar building and Mugar garden. Something important about Beirut, and let me connect it with what you speak about in general in this conference. There is so much hidden in Beirut, not in politics. I'm not talking about current issues, but about the ancient stories of Beirut. For example, when I came here, they told me that this building once was the Russian consulate. Oh, fine. And then I learned that, no, when I became president, an old man came to me, a friend of my father's then, and he said, I used to get my salary from your office because this was the headquarters of the Iraqi Petroleum Company at some point. And then I learned that, no, almost in the late 1920s, this building was built by a very famous engineer, architect, I don't know what he was, whose name was Yusuf Aftimos. Aftimos, for those of you who know Beirut, the municipal building, Baladiyat Beirut, municipal building. Those who know the Sanaya Garden, and there's a fountain, the fountain. Those who know the Sodico area, now there's a museum. After the war, there's a museum. That's Aftimos. The Trad Hospital, Aftimos. And this one is Aftimos. He built it as a house, and then it developed. Now it is administrative and libraries. So then I started looking into this Aftimos. Who is Aftimos? Yusuf Aftimos sounds Greek to me and all that. No, it says he's a Lebanese architect. And then over the years, I suddenly realized his wife's name, family name, is Armenian. Oh, so why is it Armenian? Rose, I believe it was, Rose Avedisian. And whose daughter is she? I figured that his, Aftimos's father-in-law, was the head engineer in the late 19th century of the Vilayet of Syria, the Ottoman Vilayet of Syria. He did so well, this man, that they brought him to Beirut. So he became a head of the engineering of the Ottoman Empire, engineering group or work for all of Beirut. So most of the buildings in Beirut, the governmental Saraya, the current library, University of Law, at some point, I mean, many buildings were part of his father-in-law's work. So Yusuf Aftimos here is the son-in-law of someone else. What is the name of that someone else? The name is Bshara al-Muhandis. Make a note, I mean Google later on this, because most Lebanese wouldn't know. Bshara al-Muhandis. Bshara is like the evangel, the good news in Arabic. Al-Muhandis is like the engineer. Bshara al-Muhandis. Actually, he is Minas Avedisian. Avedisian means Bshara. So they translated it. Now everyone thinks all these works in Beirut are Bshara al-Muhandis, and there is a Muhandis family in Lebanon, so it fits. Except that you dig a bit more, and then you realize just 100 years ago, names were very different, and people didn't know what stood for what. Fine, I don't want to interfere in archaeological issues which I haven't studied. But as we know, if we know how to dig properly, the surprises are many, and it's not what things seem. One of the problems, I believe, in university, we teach critical thinking. One of the challenges we have is with critical thinking, how much deeper can you dig in a genuine way? Because we need to discover things as they were or in a different way. Anyway, that's my story for this morning. I wish you all the best. I'll try to be, I have a number of meetings every hour, so I'll try to sneak in and out. My office is in the Mugar building, the Der Magardician building. And I know that in the garden you'll see a couple of things later on, but I think I'll have a meeting at that same point. Thank you so much. You're most welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. And I'll be here another 20, 25 minutes so to enjoy part of your conversation. Thank you so much again.
Dr. Anne Mulay-Noonan.
Yes, I'm Anu Leinonen. I'm the acting director of the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, FIME in short, and I'm also really happy to welcome all of you into this small conference on changing and enduring ancient Near East. And so this is the first sort of a bigger live event that we have done here in Lebanon after COVID. I mean, we've only had a couple of very small invitation-based ones. So this is special. And so FIME is a small academic institute. Our main office is here in Beirut and may have a small office in Helsinki as well. But we're supposed to cover all of Middle East, and we are 7 people, so it's quite a task. So what we mostly do is we organize conferences together with other people. It's like now Vanna is working with us on this because we don't have the expertise, so we're really happy to have Vanna to do this with us. So the institute is small, but we do have long-standing traditions in Finland, with academic interest in the Middle East. The first university in Finland was founded in 1640, and of course that still was part of Sweden, so it was the Royal Academy of Turku. And there were 11 professors, and already then one of the chairs was the chair of sacred tongues. So that's Hebrew and Greek. So there was a measure of interest already in that time, considering that one of 11 positions had this connection. And of course, like elsewhere in Europe, it was initially really biblical, the interest. But it started to widen. And so then the name of the chair was changed into the chair of Oriental literature, or literatures perhaps. Then it was the chair of Semitic languages. Then it became the chair of Semitic languages and cultures, and currently it's the chair of Middle Eastern studies. And of course also since then 1840s, when Finland was part of the Russian Empire, Finnish scholars and researchers started also to travel to the Middle East, and they were involved with research or excavation projects also here. So Finland has a modest collection of objects that are at the moment being displayed at the National Museum in Helsinki. And I think the the best current example of this long tradition of research is, of course, ANE, the Center of Excellency. So a Center of Excellency is a rather large group of researchers that get funding for several years to focus on a certain theme. And ANE, of course, is ancient Near Eastern empires. So this really, also the topic of today's conference, or I mean, today's and tomorrow's conference is really at the center of the work in ANE. And we have here a couple of persons from ANE that I think, Saimi and Päivi, who in the back row, who I'm sure they will be happy to tell you more about the work in ANE. And I also want to thank the Haigazian University for being kind enough to host us and assist us with everything. And once again, thank you, Vanna, for doing this with us. We are really happy. So, do you want to come and introduce the speakers next? Of research is, of course, ANE, the Center of Excellency. So a Center of Excellency is a rather large group of researchers that get funding for several years to focus on a certain theme. And ANE, of course, is ancient Near Eastern empires. So this really, also the topic of today's conference, or I mean, today's and tomorrow's conference is really at the center of the work in ANE. And we have here a couple of persons from ANE that I think, Saimi and Päivi, who in the back row, who I'm sure they will be happy to tell you more about the work in ANE. And I also want to thank the Haigazian University for being kind enough to host us and assist us with everything. And once again, thank you, Vanna, for doing this with us. We are really happy. So, do you want to come and introduce the speakers next? Yeah, welcome once again.
Thank you. Okay, so before we start with our first session, just some brief announcements. We will be filming the speakers and hopefully to later put on YouTube. But of course, we're going to ask for your permission, so any speaker that does not want his talk to be on YouTube can please let us know. I also have cue cards for the speakers, so look towards me. I'll give you a 5 minutes time notice. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can come up to me, and also Sandra and Vera. Sandra is at the back, and Vera. So whatever questions you have, you can come to us. Okay, so let's start with our first session, which is the pre-classical period. And I would like to welcome our chair, Professor Herman Gens. So Dr. Gens is a professor of archaeology at the Department of History and Archaeology at the American University of Beirut. His research focuses on the Levant, Anatolia, and more broadly the Eastern Mediterranean between the 4th and the 1st millennium BC. His themes of research center on transitions from village communities to more complex societies, the incorporation of the Levant into large empires, and the socio-economic changes that accompany these transformations. He also explores the chronological and functional aspects of Bronze Age pottery, mining and metallurgy, the interrelation between human societies and their environment, agricultural practices, and trade relations between the Levant and its neighboring regions. Professor Gens has conducted extensive fieldwork in Germany, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon with different international universities, the AUB, and the German Archaeological Institute. So please, Professor Gens, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to chair this first session of this conference. I can only add what has been emphasized before. It's so wonderful to see people face to face again. I'm just so tired of online conferences. So anyway, as has been announced, the first session, the first 3 speakers deal with the pre-classical period. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Luigi Turri. He's currently research assistant at the University of Verona. He earned his MA from Verona, then his PhD at the University of Udine. He has been working extensively in Syria, Iraqi Kurdistan, and most recently Lebanon, where he's part of the Northern Lebanon Survey project. And his talk will be on the relationship between coast and hinterland in the late Bronze Age Lebanon. And I guess that will at least partly incorporate the recent field work in northern Lebanon. Okay, so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I will speak mainly about northern Lebanon, actually. It's not included in the title. But when we think about Lebanon in pre-classical time, our mind goes immediately to the rich coastal city, the Canaanite centers of the Bronze Age, or the Phoenician cities of the Iron Age, that, by the way, are almost the same one: Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, Byblos. As concerned the hinterland instead, or inner region as the Bika, the classical and later times are very well attested through the surviving monuments and the reuse of building materials. But on the other side, we don't know almost anything about earlier time of this area, not only archaeologically, but also from the text. Our documentation that's so rich for the coastal city is rather poor for the inner region. Despite this, the however scarce evidence shows us that Lebanon was not just made up of the wealthy and powerful coastal centers, and that also the inner one could have an important political and economic role. One of the most famous of this one is the city of Amia, that's normally identified with the modern city of Amiun in the plain of Kura. Which is mentioned more or less 15 times in cuneiform sources. That's not a lot if you consider that it's the most famous one, as I've just said. The first mention of Amia came from the statue, the inscription of Idrimi of Alalakh, from his so-called autobiography that's engraved on his statue. This supposed autobiography is recounted fictionally by the king himself, and he tells that the future king was forced to leave his house in Aleppo and found refuge in the city of Amia that sits in the land of Canaan. That means in the land that was under the Egyptian control in the late Bronze Age. In the city, there were many other runaways. We can see here, in Amia dwells people originally from Aleppo and the lands of Moki, Shinia, and Amai. These are refugees who escaped, as Idrimi himself has done, from the belligerent northern region of Syria. So Mukish, the Hatay province, more or less, Nia, the Rab, and Aleppo, naturally. They escaped from the turmoil that must have followed the fall of Aleppo and the great kingdom of Yamkhad. All of these people found shelter in Amia, where Idrimi stayed for a while, according to the text, for 7 years. Living among the Habiru as one of them, so as a social outsider, at least with regard to the society of the Greek powers, the one knows from the text and the one that is represented by the text. The rural region of Kura would have been an excellent destination, a perfect place to escape. From description, we know also that the region was not too far from the sea, from the coast, that there were good timber and there were shipbuilding craftsmen, since Idrimi was able to leave the country by sea on vessel that he has built, carrying soldiers to reconquer his land. Actually, he couldn't get back Aleppo, but he became king of Alalakh, that's the modern Telachana. But what are the differences between Amia and the other cities on the coast? The organization of the region could be reconstructed through the Amarna letters. So the letters that the Near Eastern kings sent to the pharaohs Amenophis III and Amenophis IV, or Akhenaton. The letters sent to Egypt by the city of Byblos represent alone almost 1/5 of the entire the whole corpus, and many information could come from them. First of all, it's clear that Byblos, the coastal city as Byblos, had some direct dependencies, including towns on the coast that were on the mountains, together with towns that were on the coast, as you can see here. Among Byblos towns on the coast, there were Batruna, the modern Batrun, Shikata, the modern Shekka, Ambi, the modern Amphe, and Bitarha, that has not been yet identified, but that according to me and some others could be El-Heri. Maybe Professor Gantz can give us some more hints about that, since but the Amarna letters indicated among the cities that were not on the coast, there were other centers which had kings of their own, like Amia, the modern Amun, Ardata, Tel Arde, or Irkata, Tel Arka. They could have been somehow connected with Byblos in a sort of control or vassalage, but they were autonomous, they had their own kings. These settlements sit in rural areas, and we can suppose, also considering the mention of the Habiru in the description of Idrimi, that they had a different structure compared to the coastal cities, maybe a more tribal than an urban structure. They were secluded from the international political scenario. Actually, they represent its opposite, since they became center of attraction for those who needed to escape from the international world system, as Idrimi. This particular condition could be the reason why we have little written evidence on these centers, whose existence is nevertheless becoming increasingly clear thanks to the survey conducted in the area. I mean, I'm part, as Professor Gantz said, I'm part of the Northern Lebanon project, which has shown that Amun was a rather important center already in the early Bronze Age, so centuries before the first mention to the city of Amia in a text. But the survey has revealed the presence of widespread millennium remains in the city, providing substantial data to support the identification of the ancient city with the modern one. And we can also speculate a little on this role of Kura and other border and the surrounding bordering region as place of shelters for runaways and escapees. We can imagine that in the same area where Idrimi stayed, there was the good land called Ia, which half a millennium before Idrimi, has welcomed and exalted another very well-known refugees, the Egyptian Sinue. According to his fictional autobiography, that's another thing in common with Idrimi, in this region there were figs and grapes. It had more wine than water. Abundant was its honey, plentiful its oil. All kind of fruit were on its tree. Barley was there and emmer, and no end of cattle of all kinds. That are all goods that could still be found in the region today. But this is just a speculation, as I said. So we go back to the late Bronze Age. And after the return of Idrimi to the north, there was also an exchange of people. Some person original from Amia are found in Alalakh, actually. When Idrimi left the region on ships carrying soldiers to conquer his land, some local inhabitant must have followed him, since the census list from Alalakh level 4 contains reference to people from Amia that were involved in activities in Alalakh, and at least one of them was actually a soldier, so maybe connected with the one who followed Idrimi or Nansen. And the letter from Byblos inform us also of the desperate attempt made by its king, Rib Adda, to defend the lands of the pharaoh, as it called him, he calls his land. Probably his real purpose was to maintain control over his own domains against the advance of Amurru, which in turn also claims to act in the interest of Egypt. The ruler of Amurru is Abdashir, a man of unknown origins, who was the first to bring to the on the scene the until then known state of Amurru. The name of Amurru was old and has been used with different meanings throughout history, mainly geographical meaning, but it was used here for the first time to point to a political entity, to a state. And according to the petrographic analysis of the letters, the el-Amarna letters, especially those sent from Amuru, the early tablets, using the word of Gore and Finkelstein and Aman, who has studied, was carried out this petrographic study, Amuru was a small highland chiefdom located on both banks of Nahar el-Kabir on the slopes of Mount Lebanon, and inhabited by farmers, pastoral groups, and elements that had been uprooted from urban and rural sector. Then, continuing the study from the subsequent letters, we can reconstruct that the core of Amurru expanded from the mountains area near Tripoli southward. Subsequent letters were likely sent from the Nahar el-Awad area. Nahar el-Awad is a tributary of Nahar Abu Ali, so maybe from Tel Arde. And then northwards, since the next letters comes from this area, from Tel Arka, and from here they could move to take control of the Homs gaps, and from here moves to the conquest of the Middle Orontes area. And it is with this expansion that we start to have written information about Amurru. Exactly at the time it began to take part in international politics, or better, to interfere with international politics and the power, the great power, the proto-imperial power, we could say, of the time. The contention between Rib Adda and Byblos and Abdashir of Amurru, and then with Aziru of Amurru, had as its center the control, what's happened here? The control of the cities of Sumura, that correspond to Tel Gazel, more or less, where there was the Egyptian garrison, and Lulaza. The cities were of primary economic and strategic importance, since their port offered direct access to the Akra Valley and to the Homs Gap, that as a fundamental passageway. They had extensive fertile farmlands. The city were directly dependent on Egypt. There was intervention in the Akra Plains that back to the time of the Thutmosis I and then Thutmosis III. Ulaza became the base of an Egyptian garrison at the time of Tutmosis III. The pharaoh needed a city as a foothold in Lebanon and as a starting point for his military campaign, as a place where he could load his ship with the precious wood from the mountains or with the goods sized as booty. Egyptians have repeatedly taken advantage of the richness of the region during time, of its grain, of its fruit, of its wine. The city should have been controlled by a local regent when the Egyptian commissioner was not there. If we have to trust Abdeshirta, who says, may the king, the sun, ask the commissioner if I don't guard Sumura and Ulaza. When my commissioner is on mission of the king, the sun, then I'm the one who guards the harvest of the grain of Sumura and all the lands for the king, my son, my lord. So the desire to be the one who had this role and gained all the associated benefits, so the privileged relationship with Egypt, access to the richness of the area, access to the routes to inner Syria, must have been one of the main reasons of the long contention between Rib Adda of Byblos and the rulers of Amurru. The lack of soil suitable for agriculture on the coast have always been have always made the foothills and inland plains desirable. So the already mentioned plain of Kura, that's rich in water course, has a high annual precipitation between 700 800 millimeters per year, and moderate temperature must be very attractive. This characteristic gives to the region both a local economic importance, but also a wide strategic significance as a natural crossroad between the coastal area, from which it's separated by a plateau, you can see here, and to the mountains, and also to the Akar Gap to the north. Today, the main center of the area, as already said, is Amiyun, that stays in a dominant position on a high mountain overlooking the plain and the routes between the sea and the inner area. A location that has favored the city through the ages, as we can understand from the many ancient structures still standing and that are visible there. As Amia get caught in the struggle between the kings of Byblos and the men of Amurru, Abdeshirta. Abdeshirta was considered an outcast, a Habiru by Rib Adda, who never calls him king or lord or with any other title. He calls him servant and dog. Where is it? Here, somewhere here. Okay. So he doesn't have any, he acknowledged that in this way his non-conforming status and the lack of place in the established international order, the order of the great powers, but also the inhabitants of Amia were Habiru, according to the Idrimi inscription. The different origins of the two enemies, Rib Adda and Abdeshirta, allows us to see how the two worlds, the international one, represented by the coastal cities like Byblos, and the rural one, typical of centers like Amuru, Amia, were both opposite and complementary. Abdeshirta came from the second one, the rural one, and was certainly in no position to compete with Byblos. At the beginning of his uprising, probably he had no possession or footholds on the coast, and he was not used to sea travel. So he had to start his advance in the territory he knew the best. This is through the rural region where he could count on the support of other persons, other kings similar to him. At the same time, in order to compete with Byblos, he tried to gain control of cities that already knew how to deal with the sea and that could benefit from the fall of Rib Adda of Byblos. This explains the double line of attack moved by Rib Adda to Abdeshirta on Byblos. On one hand, he advanced through Kura, a region that bordered Amurru, and which partly shared the characteristic of Amurru. he tried to win the support of the local population, pushing them to get rid of their rulers who had probably connection with the other rulers connected with Egypt. On the other hand, he tried to get the approval of Egypt itself, and the benefit that came with this. And from here, the long struggle for the control of Sumura and the subsequent conquest of coastal cities allied or subjected to Byblos. This situation is clear from letter 73, in which the king of Byblos informed the Egyptian official Amanapa that Sumura had fallen, and Abdiashirta had written to the men of Amia to persuade them to kill their lord and to join the Habiru. This must have frightened the other city rulers who were afraid of meeting the same fate of the ruler of Amia, joined the Habiru. From letter 75, we learn that the king of Irkata had been killed and that the men of Arashni had seized Ardata. And this confirmed Abdiashirta's strategy and showed that he was trying to take control of the whole inner region. And would have to consider that with the subjugation of Sumura and Irkata, he would have also had a privileged position to access and control the Homs gaps. So the most convenient passage to inner Syria and a link also to Mesopotamia. With the fall of Sumura, Amuru influence extended to the sea. Arwad ships begin to operate in his aid, as we can see in letter 101. This occurred the crucial moment when Abdiashirta died. After the capture of Sumura, the next step was the conquest of the northernmost city of Byblos, Ampi, Soenfe, and Shikata, Shekka, followed by Bit Arha, that actually is Harry has a crucial position in control both the coastal route and the inner land route, the only available one, because it's on Ras Shaka. That's one of the most difficult passages even today. If you go to the north, you can see how difficult it is to cross Ras Shaka with a lot of problem with earth sliding that are known from antiquity, from there were earthquakes in antiquity that are very well attested in the region. But the death of Abdiashirta, of his enemy, gave the king of Byblos some respite. But the situation soon recurred, as previously with the sons of Abdiashirta, especially with Aziru, who continued his fatal strategy. The attack leading to Rib Adda's defeat and his escape to Beirut must have been the result of two-way assault, both by the sea through the help of allied ships, as that of Arwad, and by land from the hinterland, the conquest of which had already deprived Byblos of its supplies, as we can see from the letter. Byblos went into debt to buy the supplies from Yarimuta, the land of Yarimuta. That's not clear where it is. There are a lot of supposition, but by the way, he had to buy them from abroad. The situation appears clearly in letter 100 and forward. Adda writes that the cities of Ampi, Shikata, Ulaza, Arwad are at war with me. Should they hear that I was entering Sumura, there would be the cities with sheep and the son of Abdiashirta in the countryside. They would attack and I would be unable to get out, and Gubla, the Byblos, would be joined to the Abiru. So, to conclude and to sum up, the coastal city needed inner territories in order to obtain basic goods such as food, waters, wood, but they probably had no real ambition of an expansion, which would in any case be difficult because of the mountains, which are barriers on one side, but also a resource because they provide timber that is used for shipbuilding, it's used to trade, and also fertile land. The coastal city were an important storage place, markets, distribution center for raw material, for worked objects, especially the luxury one. And for this region, Egypt and subsequently the Greek powers that dominated the area in the first millennium, Assyria, Babylonian, Persia, and going on in time, controlled the area with locally placed commissionary and garrison, but leaving the city the freedom to continue their commerce and to contribute in this way to the enrichment of the overlords via tribute and trade. we may suppose that the Lebanese coastal city survived to the crisis of the late Bronze Age because they adapted to this international world, to the world of these great powers, but they never get really part of it. This is even more true for the cities of the hinterland, for which we have a very poor written documentation, but growing archaeological evidence, and which never really came into direct contact with international politics, since they would have dealt mainly with the local cities on the coast. Through the autobiography of Idrimi, the letters of el-Amarna, and the text of Alalakh, we discovered that even the hinterland and the territories beyond the mountain were rich in inhabited centers and small kingdoms, whose existence started to be confirmed also by, starting to be confirmed also by archaeological discoveries. These many entities of variable size are rarely mentioned by the ancient text, probably because their existence doesn't fall within the interest of the great international power. Yet the inner area of Lebanon proves to be both a place of immigration, capable of welcoming those fleeing from the wars that were devastating foreign countries, foreign regions, as Idrimi, and also an area of emigration, considering that some people from the area are found active in Alalakh. Knowing, understanding, exploiting the dichotomy between the prosperous international coastal center and the rural highland were some of the most important factors that allowed the kings of Amurru to expand from the hinterland, from the hilly hinterland of Tripoli, to control most of northern Lebanon and part of Western Syria at the expense of Byblos and his king Rib Adda. The brief review of the evidence that I've made show how in the past, not too differently from today, the two political and social realities of the coast and the hinterland were at the same time opposite and complementary. This dichotomy permitted to the king of Amurru, the proper use of the dichotomy, to interact with the great kings of Egypt and of Hatti, giving also some hard times to them. Egypt of Hatti, the imperialistic or the proto-imperialistic, more probably, more powers of the late Bronze Age, didn't consider Amurru at the same levels, but actually needed its alliance to control some fundamental area passages. So the two parts seems absolutely necessary one to the other, as well as opposite. And I think I finished my time. That's all.
Has only been possible through the field work of the Northern Lebanon project. I think, I'm not sure, we started later than announced, so I think we definitely have time for a few questions or comments. Then I have a question. The tricky question of Ulaza. Any new any new ideas where maybe
somewhere in Tripoli.
Okay.
Actually, not really.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. No other questions? Comments? Okay then. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
So our next speaker will be